Information fueled,
opinion driven. This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
7:08, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to you. August 1st of 2024, primary day across Nashville and Tennessee. Thank you very much for listening, along with Johnny B., Ken Weaver. I am Dan Mandis, and Andy Ogles is joining us. Andy, always great to have you in, 5th Congressional District Congressman. And it is primary day, so I'm assuming you're here to not only vote, but do whatever congressmen do on primary day.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a busy day. Our kids run cross country, and we always tell them, even if you're in the lead, you turn on your jets and you run through the tape, and that's what we're doing. We feel good about tonight, but at the end of the day, we're going to run through the tape, and we're not going to let up until the polls close, and we've won this thing.
Let me ask you, so for the better part of 2 years, you have been hard at work, your first term. And you think it's gone pretty well. Your opponent, Courtney Johnston, it basically says you've done nothing in the 2 years and you do nothing but chase headlines. Your reaction?
Well, I'm out there, especially on topics like being tough on the border and tough on immigration, driving the narrative. You've got, so Numbers USA scores the issue of a secure border and tough on immigration. There's 4 members of Congress that have a perfect score. I'm one of those 4. There's something called the Freedom Index. There's 5 members of Congress that have a perfect score. I'm one of those members of Congress. I'm ranked 4th most conservative in Congress. And that being said, I hold the record for most legislation offered by any freshman in history, and I also hold the record for most legislation passed out of the House of Representatives than any freshman in history. So part of it is getting out there, and I make it a point to talk to. So every day, so either Monday or Tuesday, it's called a fly-in day. And I'll have dinner with other members of other Republicans from across the political spectrum. Why? Because you need, essentially, again, within the Republican caucus, you need that wide swath of votes to get your legislation passed. And kudos to my legislative team, because we're out there, we work hard. But anytime there's an Ogles piece of legislation on the House floor, I'll have members come up to me and say, all right, explain to me what this does. Why is it important? So, for example, just passed an amendment that reduced oil and gas rates for leases, because we've got to get back to energy independence. I would argue that's important, being energy independent, having more money go into research and development and have those savings passed on to the consumer.
So of all of that legislation, what is your favorite piece of legislation that you have submitted?
I do a lot in the foreign policy space, but also a lot for our veterans. And so, what we've seen, and I saw this as county mayor, is the amount of travel time our veterans spend getting services from the rural communities, having to go to Nashville or Murfreesboro. And so expanding the menu of services that your veterans can get at their local hospital, especially those hospitals that are, whether they're community owned, like Murray County Regional, which is a county owned hospital, or a nonprofit like a Vanderbilt, is that people can go to and get the services in their community versus having to drive an hour for those same services. And then, so that's important to me, as well as the living conditions for our troops on their bases, because some of the barracks are rather deplorable.
Let me ask you, you were appointed chairman of the Counterterrorism Task Force, and we know about the wide open border. We'll get to the impeachment articles that you have against Kamala Harris here in a minute. But let me ask you, how scared are you that we are going to suffer some sort of an attack? You know stuff that you can't even talk about on the radio. I understand that. But from what you've seen as, again, chairman of the Counterterrorism Task Force, you worried?
Yeah, quite frankly, I'm surprised that we haven't had an attack already. We've got roughly 400 individuals with direct ties to terrorism that we've caught at the southern border. We have individuals that have slipped through the cracks, and we know they're operating. So we know for a fact there are terror cells operating on the lower 48, that we know they're here. We know that they're planning something. And we've caught individuals with bombs at the southern border. And so that's why I issued the articles of impeachment. We've got to have this conversation. We have to hold our border czar the Harris Biden administration accountable for it. I mean, our streets have been flooded with fentanyl. Why? Because of the southern border. Crime is up in every community across the country. Why? Because of the southern border. And the list goes on and on and on. And we've got to have this tough conversation. And quite frankly, the corporate media is trying to reinvent who Kamala Harris is right before our eyes. I mean, like literally deleting stuff from their websites. They're reinventing her. Why? Because they don't want Donald Trump to be president.
You know, one of the things that I find interesting, and you're right about the corporate media and mainstream media and so forth. And I think as we look at what's happening, and I call it the rebranding of Kamala Harris, they did this in 2020 with the laptop from hell when they said, oh, that's not real. It's Russian disinformation and so on and so forth. The 51 intelligence officials, all of that. They're doing the same thing now. And it's frustrating. One of the things that they like to do is they like to say that, and I think this was an ad that I played yesterday from Kamala Harris, where they like to say that Donald Trump stood in the way of bipartisan immigration reform. And the thing that frustrates me is that you folks in the House had a great piece of legislation on the border and immigration that Chuck Schumer simply wouldn't even bring to the floor of the Senate.
Well, you know, that's one of the frustrating things about the House currently is that we don't have both chambers. And so you do the work. You know, House Bill 1 was about energy independence, so it was good energy policy. House Bill 2 was border security. We had a standalone bill on Israel. And meanwhile, the Senate doesn't take it up. And so I think a good question would be is, you know, why do you again, broadly, the House passed that legislation knowing that the Senate's not going to take it up. Part of it is you're forcing the conversation, you're offering solutions to the American people, but then also you've got to fast forward to the first 100 days. And so if you assume for a moment that Trump's going to win, I think he has the opportunity. He's got to stay on point, stay on a message, stick to the facts. We can win the White House. We're going to win the Senate. We can win the House of Representatives. That first 100 days is critical. Because we're out here. Look, the American people know that we're in crisis, whether it's the southern border, whether it's the economy. Those are the two issues, whether it's the 5th congressional district. I was just with President Trump, and we had that conversation of like, what are you seeing and hearing across the country? And it's the same everywhere. It's the border and it's the economy. And so we have solutions. And once we get in there for the first 100 days, we've got to start passing policy that really makes a difference on people's lives. And part of that means we're deporting all of those people that came here illegally. It's a tough conversation. We have to have that conversation. And quite frankly, we have to start deporting people en masse. That's why I had the Send Them Back Act, which would do just that. Well,
part of the issue is that, and you just said it's uncomfortable to talk about, and I get that. But the reality is that, 72% of Americans, including a lot of Hispanics and so forth, they're all for mass deportations. And so it may be uncomfortable for some. Maybe I've just been, bloviating for too long, but it's not uncomfortable for me that came here illegally. You start with the really, really bad guys and move on from there.
Yeah. You've got to prioritize. But look, if you and I go to France or Germany or Britain or Canada or Mexico, we're there illegally or we overstay a visa, they're going to kick us out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even a question, right? And so suddenly we're in the same position and the world criticizes us for wanting to keep our border secure. I'm sorry. It's our country. We get to decide who comes in. And quite frankly, we get to decide who leaves. And I was, again, with the president. He agrees we have to start deporting people and it's got to be a priority. And so, and like you said, you can prioritize, you can start with the worst of the worst. And that's the thing that people need to understand. So why suddenly do you have all these 12, 13, 14-year-old girls being raped all over the country? Iowa, New York, Virginia, Louisiana, Texas. I mean, it's becoming, unfortunately, just normal. If that's, you can even say that.
Here's the problem. It's normal in those countries.
That's right. That's right.
Those countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Venezuela. It's just, there's not a lot of law and order in those places. And so they come here and they think that they can get away with it. And so that is a big part of the conversation, whether we are talking about rape, whether we're talking about murder and so forth. And it's almost, it's not a joke, but I've made the statement where, all you have to do is a quick Google search almost every single day, and you'll find yet another story of an American who's been negatively impacted by an illegal alien. Talk about the articles of impeachment against Kamala Harris. I think this is an interesting conversation because it has to do with the border. It does also have to do with the 25th Amendment. I also want to get to an investigation into who knew what when about Joe Biden and his lack of cognitive ability and the decline. But talk about why you're doing it, because you just said a few minutes ago, well, we don't have the Senate, so it's not really going to go anywhere. But it is about forcing the conversation.
Well, and we have a constitutional oath, right? In the same way that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have a constitutional obligation to uphold their oaths, to uphold the law of the land. We have a constitutional obligation to uphold our job. In that is to hold Kamala Harris responsible for what she didn't do as the border czar, which is she allowed Mayorkas, she allowed the administration to obfuscate, to ignore law. And again, it's one of those, we can't pass laws based off of what the Senate may or may not do. Our job is, the people's house. John Quincy Adams. That's where you argue. That's where you debate. That's where you do the people's work. This is the people's work. We've got to force this conversation on deporting people who are here illegally, and we can't allow Kamala Harris to suddenly blame Trump for her failings, because that's what she's going to do. I literally just watched one of her speeches, or part of one of her speeches, and she talks about it's Trump's fault. Like, you're kidding me, right? 10 million people come here illegally under your watch, and it's Trump's fault.
Well, and that is the thing. And let me see if I can pull up the commercial that she put out. I lost my mind yesterday, because you're right. She's got a commercial out there, and what they're trying to say is that it is Donald Trump's fault, and she's also trying to say that she would be tougher on the border. Now, obviously, John, I need some audio if I could. Let me just play this real quick. This is Kamala Harris trying to convince the American people that she would be tougher on the border.
On the border, the choice is simple. Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents. Donald Trump blocked a bill to increase the number of Border Patrol agents. Kamala Harris supports investing in new technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Donald Trump blocked funding for technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Kamala Harris supports spending more money to stop human traffickers. Donald Trump blocked money to stop human traffickers. Kamala Harris prosecuted transnational gang members and got them sentenced to prison. Trump is trying to avoid being sentenced to prison. There's two choices in this election: the one who will fix our broken immigration system, and the one who's trying to stop her.
So I don't really, what angle is she going for? I mean, it is common knowledge in this country that, number one, Donald Trump himself can't block anything. He's not even in any kind of an office, but that's number one. But number two is everyone knows what the problem is, and everyone who pays attention knows that it was Mayorkas, Harris, and Biden. My worry is that nobody pays attention until right now.
Well, technically she's not the nominee. She will be here very shortly. And I think what you'll see after the nomination is finalized and secure, that she's going to start talking about conversations or disagreements she had with Joe Biden on the border. So she's suddenly going to shift her blame to Joe Biden and say, but if I had been president, I would have done this. Had I been president, I would have done X. And so we've got to go ahead and define her before she can make that shift, because she is culpable. She hasn't even been to the southern border. She went near the southern border, right? And so she's the border czar. And so you can't claim credit for the successes, quote unquote, of the Biden administration, meanwhile dodging all of the failures. And we know that border policy, look, when you have the mayor of Dallas, Chicago, and New York screaming, please shut down the border, you're killing us, crime is up, fentanyl is literally killing their citizens, and they do nothing. And so she is not, again, the ads are ridiculous. She has a similar ad in one of her speeches talking about how she's a champion for the middle class. Mind you, she doesn't think you should be able to buy health insurance, right? Yet she wants to give free health care to illegals. Who pays for that?
Yeah.
It's the middle class, right? And so policy after policy after policy, she's bad on it. And ultimately, the lower and the middle class bear the brunt of it.
723, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7. Congressman Andy Ogles is joining us. It is primary day across the state of Tennessee. It is interesting, real quick, is that just to close that point, is that if she is going to try to say that she would have done it differently if she was president as opposed to Joe Biden, well, how many interviews has she stated that she is always the last person in the room when these decisions are made? She has said that a number of different times. I'm in on all the decisions. I stand by the decisions, and I'm always the last person in the room. So my fear is that the very same media that you're talking about is going to help her sell herself as something clearly that she is not. Primary day, August 1st of 2024, along with Johnny B., Ken Weaver. Again, Dan Mattis here with 5th Congressional District Congressman Andy Ogles, who joins us in studio and, just kind of talking about what a sitting congressman does during primary day. I'm assuming you're going to go vote.
Yeah, that's important. And
can I ask who you're going to vote for in the 5th?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've narrowed down my choice. But, one of the things we do in the Ogles household is, since the kids were babies, is they go and vote with us. And so, my wife and the 2 big kids went, early voted. I was unable to go. And so I'm going to go get our 9-year-old, and then he and I will go vote together. And, he'll get to vote for Dad, which is pretty cool. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. We left off the previous segment talking about various things, including articles of impeachment against Kamala Harris, the border. We left off because of incompetence at the border. That's well discussed territory. Also included in those articles of impeachment, 25th Amendment and talking about how Biden needs to be 25th Amendmented out. I mean, that's not going to happen, I assume.
Well, so there's a process, and so we and my office, we sent a letter encouraging her to invoke the 25th Amendment, so she and the cabinet can do that, and then of course Biden can appeal to Congress, and Congress could take a vote. So there's a process for adjudication, so he can have his day in court, if you will, but before Congress. And so she failed to do that, and it's clear, and it's been clear that he's not in the state to be commander in chief. I was the first Republican. So during the State of the Union, he walked into the chambers, and I was the first Republican he spoke to. And if you recall, I pointed to my lapel. So I'm polite to him. He is the president of the United States, and I point to my lapel, and I'm wearing a button for Laken Riley, and it's white and has black letters, very easy to read. I said, Mr. President, I'd like for you to look at my button. It's for Laken Riley, and she's the young woman that was killed by an illegal because of this southern border, and I need you to do something about it. And there's this kind of pregnant pause, and he says, Laken Riley, and then there's another pause, and he goes, I love your button. He was unable to connect that compound statement that, A, I want you to look at my button, and 2, on that button is the name of a dead girl because of the border. He couldn't process it. He was unable to process it. That's the commander-in-chief. We've got to do something. We have to have this conversation. Now, the problem is, and so you have one document, there's 2 articles of impeachment in there. The first part is the southern border, which the facts are there. It's beyond, the facts are there. Yeah. You can't debate it. You can't rewrite history. The other part is on the 25th Amendment and Joe Biden's cognitive decline. And so then you have to prove, when did she know? What did she do about it? If anything, the clock will run out by that time. And so we really had to focus on the southern border, but we included the 25th Amendment and the fact that that the president of the United States right now is not running the country. We are in a constitutional crisis, and Kamala Harris is guilty and complicit in covering it up, as well as the corporate media.
Let me ask you, I get fixated on weird stuff. So was that because I remember that moment when Biden was coming out and you were one of the first people that he saw. Was that the first time that you had been that close to Biden? And was that planned? Like, were you stationed there to do that?
Well, so that's kind of my seat. There are no assigned seats in the chamber, but I always sit there, and that goes back to the speaker's fight so you can have children. So like if you come to Washington, D.C. and you have kids, and I can take your kids out onto the House floor, I can actually let them vote. So they can take my card, they can push the button. So it's pretty cool. And the kids, the adults, the parents are up in the gallery, and they can take photos or whatever. But that being said, our little one is one of those kids that, you go to the grocery store, he's got to go to the bathroom. You go to the next spot, the hardware store, he's got to use the bathroom. So I'm thinking back row, aisle seat. Yep. I can slip out with Isaac. No one will notice. What I didn't realize is that was the default position for the cameras that C-SPAN. So there's just hundreds and hundreds of hours of me and the kids, and that just kind of became my seat. Tim Burchett, who's a buddy of mine from Knoxville, congressman, he sits in front of me. And so so Biden walks in, he hugs two ladies, Democrats, across the aisle. And then he turns to me, I shake his hand. I just told that story. Then he talks to Tim Burchett, and Tim starts telling him about his first date and this Corvette he has and his wife's favorite ice cream. And I mean, and Biden was just enamored by the conversation, totally forgetting the fact that he's supposed to deliver the State of the Union. Finally, his staff had to drag him away from myself and Tim because he was lost. Like literally he's lost.
See, I figured that was because there was some talk about that, about the length of time that it took for him to get to the podium. And some of us think that maybe what was going on was the Republicans were trying to distract Biden from getting up there to ensure that the drugs wore off. Let me ask you this, Congressman. You were with Donald Trump.
That's right.
On the Bitcoin conference, I think that was last weekend.
That's right, on Saturday.
And you were one of just a handful of people with the former president as he was sort of sequestered in an area because there was some sort of a security scare of some sort. And I want you to tell the story because it is a fascinating story.
Well, so I'm running a little late to the conference. I had a media interview. I don't know if it was Fox or Newsmax, but it was one of those. And so I get there a little bit late, and the Secret Service kind of moved me through the various check-in points or whatever, the layers of security, much more secure than after because of the assassination attempt. And so, but what I didn't realize is I'm moving and finally getting to backstage is that this bubble is collapsing behind me, meaning that they're locking everything down. And so finally I get the text from his body guy, Trump's body guy, says, "Hey, we're going to bring you back here in just a moment. Stand by." So I go into this room with the president. So I'm sitting at a table. It's President Trump. There's a media individual there, myself, a supporter, and his granddaughter, Kai. And we end up getting stuck at a table for about an hour, and we talked everything from golf to my articles of impeachment to he kind of paused, and he made that endorsement video for me right before the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, and he brought that up, and then he starts describing what it was like. He got struck. It took him a moment to kind of figure out what was going on, and he started to bend over. And about that time, the Secret Service tackled him. He goes, "Andy, they hit me hard." He said, "Literally, my shoes flew off." And then he talks about being on the ground and the bullets whizzing by, and it was just, you could see that introspective perspective. I think he's, as you would assume it would be, you would be, I would be, a changed man because of it, a little more reflective. And the other thing I can say is, so the conference is running late. He's supposed to be out there. He kept asking about the audience. He was getting really frustrated. He was worried about the audience, the delay. And he said, "Well, make sure they're playing music." And they're like, "Well, Mr. President, some other speakers are going." "Well, just make sure they're not just sitting there. I'm supposed to be out there speaking." So the whole time, you have the Secret Service there. You've had this individual that got snuck into the conference. They got him on video. They're having to interview everyone that this individual talked to. They're worried about his safety. And meanwhile, what's on his mind isn't his safety. It's the people in the audience, making sure that they're taken care of. And he actually, when he came out on stage, he joked about the fact that, all things considered, I'm not going to rush the Secret Service or whatever he said. But again, it was really surreal to, I have a relationship with the president, but to have that much time with him, literally across the table with he and his granddaughter, was pretty amazing.
That's had to be really amazing, surreal, and within a span of a couple of years. I mean, you've been face to face with a couple of presidents, and I think that your time in Congress has been, just from being able to meet these people and the places where you've been able to go and the things that you've been able to accomplish, I think has been something you're obviously proud about. Let me ask you, on this primary day, the difference between a Trump presidency and a Kamala Harris presidency heading into 2025. First, talk about Kamala Harris. What are you worried about if she gets into office?
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic that we will win the Senate, and quite frankly, that we will win the House. But under this scenario, if we were to lose the White House, you will see a presidency that is run by executive order. She will ignore the Congress. As vice president, she and Biden have ignored law over and over again. They weaponize the justice system against Americans, against the president. So, again, whether you like Donald Trump or don't like Donald Trump, this idea that suddenly district attorneys are going to persecute someone for political reasons, political motivations, that's scary. That did not work for the Roman Empire. It did not work for the British Empire. It's not going to work here, and really signals a decline in the institution, which is this idea that justice is blind. We've got to restore the institutions of which our foundation, our Constitution is built on, and that is justice is blind. You should be treated fairly, equally, just like anyone else. But currently, under this justice system, you're not. And I don't trust the FBI. And that's a storied institution, right? That's one of those institutions that we should have faith in. I don't trust the Secret Service. We should be able to trust the Secret Service. But so it is there are moments in history that you can point to that were pivotal in our country's history, or in Rome's history, in the British Empire, right? And this is going to be one of the, and every generation thinks that this election is the most historic. This election is going to be one of those elections that determines the course of our country. And that is either going to be the course that will devolve into chaos and ultimately, I think, the decline of the republic, or we correct course, we restore the republic, we get back on track, we start cutting spending, we deport people that are here illegally, and that's what's at stake.
Oh, I got to tell you, the thing that really worries me is she comes in, and you got, whether it's 8, 9, 12, 22 million illegals that she wants to, as she said the other day, come out of the shadows, and that means ultimately allowing them amnesty, the opportunity to vote. You've got, they're counted in the census, all of that. And so that is an entirely new voting block. So this is not only about this election, this is about future elections, because the deck is going to be stacked against us.
Well, it already is. And when you look at, so you mentioned the census. So I think there's a nefarious short-term and long-term reasons why Joe Biden, even at the cries of Democrats, has allowed our country to be flooded with illegals. One is on the short term with the motor voter required registration. Illegals in New Mexico and Arizona are registering to vote. So one, they can determine the outcome of a presidency, the presidential election, but long term, this census, it counts everyone in a state. And when you look at California and New York and the population flight, because they're coming to Tennessee, they're coming to Texas and Florida, those two states will lose congressional seats in the next census. But for the fact that they have flooded, they're backfilling those states with population. And so Tennessee really should get 2 or 3 congressional seats. Florida should get 2 or 3 or 4 congressional seats at the expense of California and New York, because people are leaving those states.
Yep.
So we've got to stop counting illegals in the census, because Democrats are getting more individuals in the House of Representatives.
There's so much at stake.
Everything.
All right. So you got 90 seconds. Talk about the possibilities in a Trump presidency.
Well, then it's we can fix this. Pray for our country, have faith in what the founding fathers believed in, but we've got to not only win the Electoral College, we've got to win the popular vote. So what I would challenge Tennessee and Florida and the other red states is, don't just go vote in November, but make phone calls, volunteer, make sure that we win Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, because if we can win the Electoral College and the popular vote, that sends a message to the Democrats that your policies are destroying this country. We have to secure this border. We have to deport individuals. We've got to stop spending our way into oblivion. We've got to cut. That's what's at stake, and it's up to you to get out there and vote and do your part.
All right, Andy Ogles, 7:52 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. So much to talk about. How hopeful are you for another couple of years? Personally, what do you want to focus on if you're reelected? What is your personal agenda? You talked a lot about, Harris, Biden, and so forth, and Trump. But what do you personally want to see done if you end up getting reelected?
Well, two things. One is obviously securing our border, and we've got to fix this immigration mess. No amnesty. We've got to deport people. That is just the hard truth of it. But the other is our spending. We've got to get back to this idea of a Byrd Commission where we're looking at areas where we cut the budget. We look at spending that is no longer relevant or needed, and we can't necessarily cut our way out of this mess, but you've got to start somewhere and then allow the economy to grow. So it's all about the economy, and really pushing a lot of this spending back to the states where the state's in charge. Look, I trust the Tennessee General Assembly to run our roads, run education, run our health care more than I trust a lot of politicians in Washington, D.C.
Good luck tonight.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.